Imagine coming home to find your trash can smashed, again, by a nosy neighbor who rules the block like a tyrant. For weeks, I endured her petty HOA power trips, fines, glares, and that smug smirk. But this time, she crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I planned something so clever, so unexpected, it turned her own rules against her. What do you do when a neighbor's obsession with control threatens your peace? Stick around to see how I flipped the script on this HOA nightmare. In the shocking moment, she realized she'd lost. I'd always dreamed of a quiet life in a tidy suburban neighborhood, where kids could bike down tree-lined streets and front yards bloomed with pride. When I bought my little two-story home in Willow Creek, a gated community with manicured lawns and a glossy HOA handbook, it felt like the perfect fresh start. I'm just a single dad, raising my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, while juggling a remote tech job. We'd spend evenings planting flowers in our small garden or waving to neighbors during walks. Everyone seemed friendly, smiles at the mailbox, small talk by the community pool. But I didn't notice the watchful eyes, the whispered rules, or the shadow of one neighbor's clipboard, always ticking boxes. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, the HOA president, lived 3 houses down. Her pristine lawn and perfect hedges screamed control, and her daily patrols felt less like neighborly strolls and more like inspections. I shrugged it off. Live and let live, right? I was too busy fixing Lily's bike or grilling burgers to care about her stern glances. That is, until the first note arrived, tucked under my windshield wiper, citing improper waste bin placement. My trash can, neatly at the curb, was apparently 2 feet too far from the driveway. A minor infraction, I thought, easily fixed. I moved it, laughed it off, and figured that was the end. But Evelyn's notes kept coming, each one sharper, each rule pettier. I didn't know it then, but those crisp, typed warnings were the opening shots in a war I never signed up for, one that would push me to outsmart her at her own game. The first note about my trash can felt like a quirky annoyance, a one-off from an overzealous HOA president. I'd chuckle to Lily about Evelyn's trash can obsession while we ate dinner, her giggles easing the sting of that crisp, typed warning. But the notes didn't stop. They multiplied, each one landing like a jab. By week 3, my mailbox was stuffed with citations: unapproved garden hose color, lawn height exceeds 3.5 inches, bicycle left visible on porch. Each violation carried a fine: $25, $50, $100. I paid the first few, grumbling but compliant, thinking it'd keep the peace. It didn't. Evelyn's patrols grew bolder. I'd catch her standing at the edge of my driveway, clipboard in hand, scribbling furiously as she eyed my property. Once, I waved politely from my porch. She didn't wave back, just stared, her lips a tight line, before marching off. Willow Creek's HOA Handbook, a 47-page tome of rules I'd barely skimmed when I moved in, became my nighttime reading. Its pages were a labyrinth of petty restrictions. No basketball hoops, no holiday lights past January 5th, no unsightly yard decorations. My flower beds, which Lily and I had spent weekends planting, were suddenly non-compliant for including marigolds, apparently too vibrant for the community aesthetic. I trimmed the lawn, hid the hose, and moved Lily's bike to the garage, but the fines kept coming. It wasn't about compliance. It was personal. Evelyn's notes started mentioning my disregard for community standards, her tone sharp enough to cut. I started to feel like a tenant in my own home, watched and judged at every turn. The tension spiked one Saturday morning when I found my trash can tipped over, contents strewn across the street. Coffee grounds, eggshells, and Lily's crumpled drawings littered the asphalt. I assumed it was raccoons until I spotted Evelyn's car idling nearby, her silhouette unmistakable behind the tinted windows. I stormed over, heart pounding, ready to ask why she'd do something so petty. But she peeled away before I could reach her, leaving me standing in a mess of garbage under the neighbor's curious stares. Cleaning it up, I felt a mix of rage and humiliation. Lily, watching from the porch, asked why someone would be so mean. I didn't have an answer, just a growing fire in my chest. I tried reasoning with the HOA board. At the next community meeting, held in the clubhouse under flickering fluorescent lights, I stood up, voice steady but firm, and asked why my property was under such scrutiny. The board, 5 retirees who nodded along to Evelyn's every word, dismissed me. Rules are rules, one said, adjusting his glasses. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her smile smug, as if she'd already won. When I mentioned the trash cans, she claimed it was likely animals and suggested I invest in a regulation-compliant bin. The room went quiet, but I felt the weight of every eye on me. Driving home, I realized this wasn't about trash cans or marigolds. It was about control. The harassment escalated. One morning, I found a new citation taped to my door, $200 for unauthorized exterior modifications. The crime? I'd hung a small birdhouse Lily had painted in art class, a bright yellow box with red polka dots. It was her pride and joy, but to Evelyn, it was a violation. I took it down, not wanting Lily to see it as another defeat, but the fines kept piling up. My savings, already stretched thin, started to dwindle. I'd lie awake at night, calculating how many more I could afford before I'd have to dip into Lily's college fund. The thought made my stomach churn. Then came the letter that pushed me to the edge. It arrived in a crisp HOA envelope, stamped with Evelyn's signature. The board was considering a lien on my property for repeated noncompliance. A lien? At my home. The place I'd bought to give Lily stability, where we'd planted roots, literally and figuratively, was now at risk. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hands, as Lily slept upstairs. The unfairness of it burned. Evelyn wasn't just enforcing rules. She was wielding them like a weapon, punishing me for daring to exist outside her vision of perfection. I could have fought back with complaints or lawyers, but legal battles were costly, and I was already bleeding money. I needed a smarter way, a way to hit back without breaking the bank. I started watching Evelyn more closely. Her routines were clockwork, morning patrols at 7 a.m., clipboard in hand, her sharp eyes scanning every yard. She'd linger longest at my house, jotting notes with a satisfied smirk. I noticed she never missed a chance to chat with other neighbors, her charm flipping on like a switch when she wanted their approval. It was a performance, and I was the villain in her script. But I wasn't going to play along anymore. I began researching the HOA handbook, not just skimming but dissecting it, looking for loopholes, gray areas, anything I could use. I found one rule buried in the fine print. All waste receptacles must be stored out of sight except on collection days. It was vague enough to exploit, and an idea started to form. A plan so bold it might just turn Evelyn's obsession with rules against her. The breaking point came a week later. I woke to find my trash can not just tipped over but smashed, its plastic lid cracked, and wheels bent. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. Lily saw it before I could hide it, her eyes welling up as she asked why Mrs. Harper hated us. That was it. The moment I decided to stop playing defense. I wasn't just fighting for my trash can or my wallet. I was fighting for my daughter's sense of home, for our right to live without fear of the next citation. I spent nights sketching out my plan, cross-referencing HOA rules, and ordering supplies online. It was risky, maybe even a little crazy, but if it worked, Evelyn would regret ever targeting my family. The air in Willow Creek hung heavy that fateful morning, thick with the promise of confrontation. I'd spent the previous nights perfecting my plan, my hands steady as I assembled the pieces in the dim glow of my garage light. No more passive compliance, no more swallowing fines like bitter pills. The HOA handbook's rule on waste receptacles had become my secret weapon. All receptacles must be stored out of sight except on collection days, and must comply with community aesthetics. Vague, exploitable, and ripe for revenge. I'd ordered a custom trash enclosure online, a sleek, weatherproof box that looked like a high-end garden shed, painted to match the neighborhood's approved palette. But inside, it housed something Evelyn never anticipated, a motion-activated camera hidden behind a vented panel, ready to capture every trespass. I installed it just before dawn, positioning it at the edge of my driveway, technically out of sight from the street, but visible enough to tempt her. The enclosure was immovable, bolted to a concrete base I'd poured under the cover of night. It was compliant, barely, but designed to irk her perfectionist soul. As the sun crested the rooftops, I retreated inside, heart racing, and watched the live feed on my phone. Lily was at school, safe from the storm about to break. Evelyn's patrol started right on schedule, her sensible shoes clipping against the sidewalk, clipboard clutched like a shield. She paused at my property line, her eyes narrowing at the new addition. I held my breath as she circled it, prodding the structure with her pen, testing its sturdiness. Then, As if on cue, she glanced around, no witnesses in sight, and gave it a sharp kick. The camera whirred to life, recording her face twisted in frustration. But she didn't stop there. Emboldened by weeks of unchecked power, she grabbed a nearby garden stake from my flower bed, Lily S. marigolds, and jammed it into the enclosure S side, trying to pry it open. The feed captured it all, her grunts of effort, the splintering wood, her whispered mutters about eyesores and troublemakers. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to wait. This was the evidence I needed, the smoking gun to expose her abuse. As she stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow, I burst out the front door, phone in hand, the video still rolling. She froze, her smug facade cracking for the first time. The neighborhood, usually quiet at this hour, seemed to hold its collective breath. A few curtains twitched in nearby windows. Word of our feud had spread like wildfire. "Evelyn," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. "This ends now." I held up the phone, the screen displaying her vandalism in crisp high definition. Her eyes widened, darting from the device to the enclosure, realization dawning like a slap. She'd been caught red-handed, not just knocking over a trash can, but actively destroying property. The fine she'd levied on me paled in comparison to this. Criminal mischief, at the very least. She stammered, her clipboard slipping from her grasp, clattering to the pavement. But I wasn't done. I'd anticipated her denial, her attempts to twist the rules. As she opened her mouth to protest, I played the video aloud, the speakers echoing her actions for any eavesdroppers to hear. Neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, their faces a mix of shock and curiosity. The confrontation escalated in seconds. Evelyn lunged for my phone, her composure shattering into raw desperation. I stepped back, dodging her grasp, as she hissed accusations of entrapment and rule-breaking. But the evidence was irrefutable. One neighbor, Mr. Jenkins from across the street, who'd suffered his own share of her nitpicking, pulled out his own phone and started recording. The tide turned then, the community's silent resentment bubbling to the surface. Whispers grew to murmurs. "She's been doing this to all of us. Remember the Parker's fence?" It's time someone stood up. Evelyn's face flushed crimson, her authority crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. She backed away, but I pressed forward, not with anger, but with the calm of vindication. In that moment, the peak of our war, I revealed the full extent of my plan. The camera hadn't just caught this one act. It had been recording for days, compiling a montage of her previous sabotage. I'd reviewed the footage the night before, Evelyn tipping my old trash can under moonlight, scattering garbage with deliberate malice, her gloved hands smashing the lid with a rock, even clips of her tampering with other properties like slashing tires on a non-compliant bike or uprooting unauthorized plants. It was a pattern of harassment, abuse of power that went beyond HOA pettiness into outright illegality. I emailed the compilation to the entire board right there on the spot, my fingers flying over the screen as she watched in horror. The subject line, "Evidence of HOA President's Misconduct." The emotional weight hit me like a wave. Years of bottled frustration, the nights I'd comforted Lily after another mean lady incident, the financial strain that had me skipping meals to pay fines. Now, it fueled my resolve. Evelyn collapsed onto the curb, her empire of rules reduced to rubble. Tears streaked her face, but they weren't of remorse, more like the fury of a cornered animal. The board members arrived within minutes, summoned by frantic calls, their expressions grim as they viewed the footage. One by one, they distanced themselves from her, murmuring about investigations and resignations. The police were called, not by me, but by a cluster of neighbors who'd finally found their voices. As sirens wailed in the distance, Evelyn's gaze met mine, a mix of defeat and lingering spite. The sirens grew louder, piercing the suburban calm like a long-overdue alarm. Evelyn sat on the curb, her hands cuffed behind her back, the once impeccable HOA president reduced to a disheveled figure under the flashing lights. Neighbors clustered in small groups, their whispers a chorus of disbelief and quiet relief. I'd stood my ground, phone still clutched in my hand, the video evidence now in the hands of the arriving officers. As they led her away, her eyes locked on mine one last time, not with the smug authority I'd come to loathe, but with a hollow defeat that almost stirred pity. Almost. The weight of months of harassment lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a tentative sense of victory. But this wasn't just about one confrontation. It was the unraveling of a tangled web of power abuse that had ensnared Willow Creek for years. In the hours that followed, the community buzzed with activity. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting that very afternoon, the clubhouse packed with residents who'd never bothered to attend before. I sat in the back row, Lily by my side. She'd insisted on coming after school, her small hand gripping mine as if to anchor us both. The board members, faces pale and voices subdued, announced Evelyn's immediate resignation. The evidence I'd compiled was damning. Not just the vandalism on my property, but a pattern of sabotage across the neighborhood. Footage showed her tampering with mailboxes, deflating tires on non-compliant vehicles, even pouring weed killer on gardens she deemed too wild. Whispers turned to outraged testimonies. Mr. Jenkins shared how she'd fined him repeatedly for his dog's barking, only to reveal she'd been leaving food scraps to attract strays. The Parkers recounted their anonymous complaints that led to their fence being torn down. One by one, the stories poured out, painting Evelyn not as a guardian of standards, but as a petty tyrant who'd weaponized rules to settle personal grudges. The police investigation moved swiftly. Evelyn faced charges of criminal mischief, vandalism, and harassment, misdemeanors that carried fines and potential jail time, but more importantly, a permanent stain on her record. Her pristine home, once the envy of the block, became a symbol of her fall. For sale signs sprouted overnight as she relocated to avoid the stairs. The fines she'd imposed on me and others were refunded in full, the board citing irregular enforcement. My bank account breathed easier, and I used the return money to buy Lily a new bike, one with bells and streamers that defied any HOA aesthetic. But the real win was the overhaul of the handbook itself. A new committee, formed from volunteers including myself, slashed the petty rules. Marigolds were back in vogue, birdhouses encouraged, and trash cans given leeway as long as they weren't eyesores. The community pool hosted barbecues instead of inspections, and patrols became friendly check-ins rather than inquisitions. Long-term, Willow Creek transformed. The air felt lighter, the lawns a bit wilder, but the neighborhood thrived. Kids played freely without fear of citations, and front porches became gathering spots for laughter rather than suspicion. I watched Lily blossom, her drawings now featuring happy homes instead of mean ladies. For me, the ordeal forged a deeper resilience. I learned to spot the signs of creeping control, to stand firm without descending to their level. But Evelyn's consequences rippled wider. Rumors spread through adjacent communities. Her name became synonymous with HOA overreach, a cautionary tale whispered at board meetings. She attempted a comeback in a nearby subdivision, but the video, now viral on local forums, torpedoed her efforts. Last I heard, she'd moved to an apartment complex with no HOA at all, irony wrapping her isolation like a bitter gift. Yet, victory came with its own shadows. The emotional toll lingered, nights when I'd jolt awake, expecting another note on my door. Lily asked questions about fairness and bullies, her innocence tinged with wariness. The community, while healed, bore scars. Trust was rebuilt slowly, with some neighbors eyeing each other warily, wondering if another Evelyn lurked among them. Financially, the refunds helped, but the stress had taken months off my life, or so it felt. I dove into advocacy, joining online groups to share my story, helping others navigate similar nightmares. It became a side passion, turning pain into purpose. Willow Creek's story even caught media attention. A local news segment dubbed it the Trash Can Rebellion, highlighting how one dad's clever trap exposed systemic pettiness in HOAs nationwide. As the sun set on those turbulent months, I reflected on the absurdity of it all, a war waged over garbage bins, escalating to handcuffs and headlines. It underscored the fragility of community, how one person's unchecked ego could poison the well for everyone. But it also illuminated the power of quiet resistance, of using wits over wrath. In the end, my invisible trash enclosure, now a neighborhood legend, stood as a monument to ingenuity, its camera dormant but ready if needed. Life normalized, evenings with Lily planting defiant flowers, waves from neighbors turned genuine friends. The fines stopped, the stares faded, and peace settled like dew on untamed grass. The takeaway burned clear. In the face of petty tyrants cloaked in authority, silence breeds suffering, but clever action sparks change. HOAs, meant to foster harmony, too often breed division through absurd rules and power plays. My story isn't unique. Millions endure similar battles in cookie-cutter suburbs across the country. But it proves that one voice, amplified by evidence and community, can dismantle even the sturdiest fortress of control. So, next time a note appears on your door or a glare crosses your lawn, ask yourself, what clever move could flip the script? Because in the game of neighborhood politics, the underdog armed with patience and proof often emerges victorious. And perhaps, in sharing this, you'll inspire the next rebellion against the Karens of the world.